fellow Tamers and Digidestined, it's Mike, aka Synaku from Overground. Welcome back to the channel. So if you're familiar with what we've been doing in the past up to this point, you'll know that every time a new set comes out, we do what's called the Rainbow Series. And in that series, we take one set of every color, we kind of build a first draft, kind of baseline deck to kind of get our feet wet and kind of get used to the format as a whole. We use what we pull out of our initial box openings and just kind of build our favorite archetypes, our favorite strategies, our favorite kind of Digimon just as a whole. And we kind of use those decks as a pilot for how we proceed with the remainder of the format. And sometimes we will revisit those decks, we'll kind of modify them, we'll change them, we'll make them better. Sometimes we just decide that the deck's kind of a lost cause and we drop it and we kind of never look back. But we need to build those in the first place to find out if they work. And leading up to the Rainbow Series, I'm not quite sure what we're going to get. I'm not quite sure what we're going to be able to build. But in the meantime, I've got some ideas that are floating in the back of my head about some of the decks that I want to build once we get to BT4. And what I've done is that I've created this video today, which I'm going to be naming Before the Rainbow, which is kind of a neat little nod at the fact that this is kind of being posted. I'm making up these deck lists before we actually get our hands on the cards. And I'm going to be talking about the shades of blue and yellow, which are some of the decks, some of my favorite colors, and some of the decks that I'm really excited to start playing with as soon as we get our boxes in of BT4. So what I'm going to go over today is I'm going to be going over 3 yellow decks, which I'm super pumped for, and then 1 blue deck, because I haven't had a chance to finish the second draft, and I really want to get this video out there before I go see my fiance for a couple of days. So let's talk about it. So we're going to go into the first yellow deck, which is going to be a more aggro version of the yellow WarGreymon, and boom, here we go. So let's go ahead and talk about it. So we've got 4 Upamon and 1 new addition to the family, which is the BT4 Koromon. And look how absolutely fucking adorable he is. I love the artwork on these cards. And this is the Koromon where when attacking, if we have 3 or less security, we give one of our opponent's Digimon minus 1000, which can become relevant the more you add up the DP reduction effects that we're going to be kind of stacking on top of each other as we go through the remainder of the deck. This deck is a much more aggressive version of ShineGreymon because we can kind of reach the same heights of DP reduction that ShineGreymon had, A, without playing like as many tamers, if not any, and B, without necessarily having to pass our turn or give our opponent as much memory as we would have with ShineGreymon. So that's really cool. But the reason we're still playing 4 Upamon here is because unlike the ShineGreymon deck where you rely on things like the Recovery Salamon and the Kari to kind of activate your kind of 3 or less effects, this deck actively is putting itself into 3 or less just on a regular basis. It's just how it generally plays. So you need to kind of offset that by playing Upamon to kind of turbo into more of your power plays more often, because Upamon's actually going to be more live in this deck just on a more consistent basis, period, than it ever was in the ShineGreymon deck, because you're putting yourself to 3 pretty much before your opponent can even get a chance to swing at your security in the first place. You're actively kind of stabbing yourself to just get so far ahead in advantage, and it's insane how much ridiculously faster this is compared to ShineGreymon and how much more powerful it is for yellow overall. And it's kind of the building blocks for how yellow is going to kind of continue to ascend as we go throughout the remaining sets that are at least currently spoiled up to this point. Yellow is just a powerhouse to beat, and I'm so excited because it's just one of my favorite colors. So that's it for the babies. Let's go into the rookie lineup. And this rookie lineup looks a little bit different than what you're used to because, again, I just talked about how we're playing a very strong DP reduction deck. But, you know, I'm not playing the DP reduction Patamon that helps me gain a memory. I'm not playing the Labramon that helps me draw. I'm not playing anything that would complement DP reduction like Salamon or anything like that. The one that minuses 1000 from BT3, or BT2, sorry. But in this case, our rookie lineup is meant to be as lean and turbo-y, I guess, as possible, while simultaneously serving a purpose for kind of the overall end game as we get to our top end. And so let's talk about that real quick. So we've got 4 copies of Tsukaimon and 3 copies of Salamon. I just wanted to get as many 2-cost rookies in here that I could cram because there's a lot of potential in one single turn to almost build up to an entire stack of WarGreymon, depending on where your opponent sets you on memory. And then we've got 3 copies of Bushi Agumon. This is the Digimon that has the new Rush skill, and this means that it can come into play, it can attack the turn it comes into play, similar to something like Haste in Magic, if you're familiar with that terminology instead. Next, we've got 3 copies of Lucemon. This is one of the chase cards, the secret rare from BT4. It costs 13 to hard play. You cannot Digivolve it on a baby. It is just not allowed. It's got 10,000 attack for a rookie, which is insane, but it has the effect that if we have 10 or more cards in our trash, we can play it by a reduced cost of 8, which means we can just slam it on board for 5. And on play, we just get to recover 1. So this is going to replace the role of our old Recovery Salamon, because whereas Salamon needed kind of a turn to set up, and then it needed to swing either into something to die or swing into security and hope that it died in order for you to trigger that recovery just to stay in the game. Lucemon, instead, for 1 cost more, potentially we're going to be hard playing it for 5 versus 4, which is the Salamon. You get the recovery immediately. But the other reason we're playing this Lucemon is because it's going to combo with an ultimate that we're going to get to later on in the video, which is right here. 1 copy of the Recovery Patamon. Again, this is to combo with another card that we're going to talk to very soon, and that's going to round out our rookie lineup. So this version of WarGreymon, we're going to be going over another WarGreymon list as well, but this version is meant to be kind of as aggressive as humanly possible. We're just literally building up stacks of WarGreymon, destroying our opponent's resources while simultaneously kind of building back our security stack to put our opponent in an unwinnable position. So let's move on to the champions. I think we've got 13 rookies here. So we've got 12 champions. We've got 4 Toruremon, 4 Pitomon, which is a new addition, and 4 Unimon. So Pitomon, cool, neat trick that we've added to the yellow arsenal. He's another 1-cost evolution to kind of go hand in hand with Toruremon, but he's also another blocker. So similarly to how we want to kind of keep ourselves in a range because we're going down to 3 security often to kind of put ourselves in range where we stay alive, having access to additional blockers is very, very key in a deck like this because it allows us to survive. But furthermore, being an extra 1-cost evolution gives us more opportunity to turbo into our WarGreymon, which is super, super, super important. Next, we're going to move on to our ultimate lineup. So this is the big ultimate that kind of ties the entire deck together, and this is Upamon from BT3 that we got in our 1.5 set. And this Upamon, when digivolving, we get to give one of our opponent's Digimon security attack -2. So similarly to kind of the blocker strategy as well, this helps us stay alive a little bit longer by targeting a stack down and ensuring that they don't have an opportunity to go after our security. And with a lot of ways to manipulate security attack in the format as well, giving security attack -2 further kind of prohibits our opponent from even touching our security depending on how big their stack may potentially be. But the reason we're playing this Upamon specifically is for this nifty little inheritable box right here. And this says that if we have 3 or less security, we can, on attacking declaration, we can play 1 yellow level 3 Digimon from our hand without paying its cost. So what this does is that when playing this deck, you're generally going to hold on to your Bushiagumons and you're generally going to hold on to your Lucamons. You're not generally going to be evolving into them into your raising area unless you absolutely have to. And the reason you're going to hang on to these is because as soon as this Anjumamon hits the table, when you start swinging with whatever you've digivolved this Anjumamon on top, you can play one of these 2 boys for free. And depending on the situation, can either potentially threaten a game shot or threaten lethal against your opponent, or keep you in the game longer because you're going to get that extra recovery. So yeah, we can just throw Bushiagumon for free, get a free swing in because it can attack the turn that it's played, or we can just slam a 10,000 rookie on the board immediately, get that recovery +1, and then start swinging for big numbers additionally with that small boy eventually on the next turn. Then we're going to move on to 1 Shakumon. This is just to help us kind of round out a Rookie Rush matchup. There's going to be a couple more variants of Rookie Rush that you're going to see in BT4, predominantly black and green related. There's a bit of a D-Brigade engine, I believe, but green gets a lot of support with the Lyomon, I believe, and they also get access to things like Needle Spray in the green starter deck, the one with Izzy on the front. And then finally, our last ultimate is another new addition from BT4, and this is going to be the Data Orange WarGreymon, and this card is just nuts. So this card digivolves for 3, but it has Digiburst 2, and Digiburst is a new mechanic that's being introduced in BT4, where you can actually detach sources from your Digimon to trigger very powerful abilities. And in this case, you Digiburst plus the number is the amount of sources that you would detach. So in this case, we're going to be detaching 2 sources. And what we get to do is we actually get to give one of our opponent's Digimon -4,000. Now that's huge, because -4,000 means that we can basically delete any rookie in the game except from like the 5,000 standpoints. But it also means that we can soften up one of our opponent's bigger stacks to potentially take down with either our 2 top ends here, which is Slash Anjumon, or the boy himself, WarGreymon. Now, Slash Anjumon, you know him, you love him. When you digivolve, you get to -8,000. So now how I said that, this deck compared to Shine Greymon can basically do similarly the same thing but without the same amount of tamers. So now if I'm at 3 with my TK in play, I can digivolve to 0 into WarGreymon, Digiburst 2, reduce something by 4,000, and then I can evolve into Slash Anjumon, passing the turn to my opponent to 3, and then reduce something by 8,000 further, which means I can reduce something by 12,000 DP without having to play a single tamer, or by only really having 1 tamer in play. Period. I don't have to worry about having the additional 3 set up. I don't have to worry about suspending them. I don't have to worry about anything like that. It's just bada boom, bada bing, instant, just huge combo. But the reason we're playing 4 copies of this is to complement our 4 WarGreymon. Now, WarGreymon, if you're unfamiliar, he is just a beast. When attacking, once per turn, we can add the top card of our security to our hand, and then we can give one of our opponent's Digimon -6,000, and then we get to unsuspend this boy himself. So again, similarly to how we would combo with the WarGreymon, if we already have a WarGreymon in play, we can bring him up to our raising area, Digiburst 2, minus something by 4,000, Digivolve into the WarGreymon immediately after, go to 0, swing with the WarGreymon, add the top card of our security back to our hand, reduce something even further by 6,000, so if they had 10,000 or less, they would immediately be destroyed. And then, or we can even soften something up that's already suspended to run it over, and then we get to unsuspend our WarGreymon to get an additional attack. And the other cool thing with the WarGreymon has the inheritable of if we have 3 or less security, this Digimon gains plus 1,000. So that means our Slash Anjumon's going to go to 9,000, which isn't nearly as relevant, but our WarGreymon's go to 12,000, which can be relevant depending on what our opponent has hiding in their security. So yeah, this deck is all about fast and quick DP reductions that are just a lot swifter and a lot deadlier than Shine Greymon that requires a lot less setup. And it's a lot less aggressive, or a lot more aggressive rather, in the sense that we get multiple swings out of our top end, and we can also create multiple swings out of nowhere with something like Bushiagumon. And then finally, to cap off our Digimon, we're actually playing pretty much the yellow Omni, and you know me, I love my Omni decks, so of course I'm going to be looking out for one that can go in every color. And this is going to be Chaosmon Valderarm. And Chaosmon Valderarm, similarly to Omni, costs 6 to Digivolve on top of green or yellow, and when Digivolving, we get to activate the following effect twice, which means we get to reduce one of our opponent's Digimon by 7,000. So this, similarly to Shine Greymon, gives us a potential to either nuke multiple Digimon, in this case potentially 2, or we can put that effect all on one single Digimon to just immediately get rid of it. Like 7 plus 7, that's 14,000. That could kill something like a Ragnar Lordmon, for example, which is actually really, really cool. But the best part about Chaosmon is that on deletion, we actually get to gain 3 memory. So if our opponent manages to deal with this threat, we're actually pretty much taking away their turn from them, or forcing them to end their turn as well. Then to round out the deck, we're playing 3 copies of Blinding Ray. This is a new option card from BT4. This lets us trash the top card of our security, and then we gain 2 memory. So it's basically Hammer Spark on steroids. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a security effect, but that's why we're playing the 3 copies of TK to kind of fish it out of our security if necessary. But this is what I mean when I say that we're going down to 3 security very, very quickly, because Blinding Ray, in combination with the WarGreymon himself, pretty much we're taking security cards away from our own stack to just kind of benefit our own playstyle on a consistent basis. And Blinding Ray in combination with TK means we start our turn with 5, which is just absolutely insane. Because now we can play our rookie for 2, we can play Churimon, go to 3, and then we can Digivolve into an ultimate immediately and choke our opponent out to 1 by constantly just leaving 1 full stack up front on top of what we potentially Digivolved in the raising area as well. And then on the next turn we go to 3, we just slam down a Mega and just start swinging for the fences. But yeah, that is my first draft. This is the first deck that we're going to be talking about in terms of the pre-yellow Rainbow series. I'm hoping to get my hands on every single one of these cards. I'm hoping that I can pull all of this out of my box based on what we actually get, and depending on kind of where the meta lands or kind of what is determined to be the most popular deck. This might change or be modified to be more tech heavy, but for the time being, this is just kind of a first initial draft at yellow WarGreymon. And this is the super aggro version of it. So now let's look at a more control grindy variant of it. So this is the more grindy version of yellow WarGreymon instead, and immediately you'll notice that there's a huge difference. So we're still playing the 3 copies of Tsukaimon here, just to give us cheap vanilla rookies if necessary, but this time we are playing 3 copies of Salamon, but we're complementing that with 3 copies of the BT2 Salamon as well, which is on attack declaration we get to minus 1,000. This time we are playing 4 copies of the Patamon in our rookie slot as well. And this version of the deck aims to play a little bit slower. We're not trying to kind of be as aggressive as possible, and instead we're kind of taking our time and controlling the board and kind of controlling our opponent's plays and controlling our opponent's ability to kind of keep things on the table. And this plays a bit more similarly to Shine Greymon, but requires again a lot less setup in the form of tamers, and is just a bit more consistent overall. So yeah, so we're using a lot more DP reduction effects. You'll see the Gatomon here. This is also from BT3. We're attacking, we get to reduce our opponent's Digimon by 1,000. So now, with our combination with our WarGreymon, on attack declaration, we can minus something by 6,000, minus something by 7,000, minus something by 8,000, depending on how our stack is lined up. And we can just potentially start controlling our opponent's board by actually just slowly destroying all of their threats on the table just by attacking, which is actually really, really cool. But we're playing a lot more grindy cards to kind of keep ourselves in the game, which is why we're playing the Salamon. We're still playing 4 copies of Pitamon. Our champion lineup changes a little bit to compensate for the 3 copies of Gatomon, so we trim down our Churimon lineup, and we trim down our Unimon lineup as well. But because we're playing more recovery cards, we can afford to play a couple less blockers as well. The only other change that we're playing here is that we're playing 2 copies of Sirenmon, and we're playing the recovery Angemon as opposed to the security attack -2 Angemon, because we're not focused on using our rookies in hand as a resource to kind of spam the board to stay alive. Instead, we're using Angemon herself to stay alive, to recover as necessary, and Sirenmon to give us a bit more speed to get into our megas. We're still playing the 4 copies of WarGreymon here, because that effect is still pretty insane, and then we're going to complement that with 3 copies of Slash Angemon, and again, 4 copies of WarGreymon. This version of the list is playing 3 copies of Chaosmon instead, because 1, we had the space, and 2, because this deck again aims to be a bit more grindy, so we're aiming to kind of constantly keep our opponent at bay before we kind of take those final shots at their security. Again, we're playing 3 copies of Blinding Ray and then 3 copies of TK to round out the deck. So this version of the deck, it's not much else to say. You just kind of play a bit slower pace. You get to take a bit more time to set everything up. If your opponent manages to be a bit more aggressive in the early game, you have more opportunities to recover, so that way you have more opportunities to kind of get into your big power play cards a little bit more, and you kind of feel a bit more in the driver's seat because you have a lot more potential to manipulate your memory and manipulate your opponent's DP as well. So this is going to be the second version of WarGreymon. This is my first take on a slower, grindier take. I'm not quite sure which deck I prefer yet. I think I'm leaning more towards this build as well, just because it feels a bit more powerful in my opinion, but I need to test both a bit more extensively. Unfortunately, I don't have access to something like TTS, and I've run out of ink on my printer, so I can't print any more proxies right now. So I'm just kind of theorizing everything right now, and if I get a chance to actually sit down and put these cards into reality before we get our hands on BT4, I'll be able to get a better sense of which deck I preferred. So now we've talked about WarGreymon versus Shrine Greymon. Well, let's talk about Shrine Greymon now, because again, it's one of my favorite decks. I can't ignore it. Here we go. So this is the Shrine Greymon list. Yeah, so all right, a lot has changed, and we got a lot of cool additions from BT4. Now, a lot of these cards you've seen already because we covered them in previous decks, so let's talk about specifically the cards that you have not seen yet. So, Pulsemon. Pulsemon is a really cool addition to yellow decks as a whole, and he just didn't quite have a place in the previous two decks, at least not that I've seen that would really kind of complement how those decks kind of main win condition want to go. But in this deck here, I feel like it actually has a bit of a cooler sequencing of plays, because it'll give us an additional draw to help get us into our tamers, to help us get it set up a little bit more on the early game. And in the late game, it can technically count as a 2-drop rookie as well. And Pulsemon, if you're unfamiliar, basically I just described both effects. On play, if we have 3 or more securities, we get to draw 1. If we have less than 3 security, we get to gain 1 memory. And that's pretty much all he does. But he is a promo card that's going to be coming out with the Great Legend pre-release, which is happening over the next couple of weekends. And he'll basically be legal in the format as soon as we get our hands on the rest of BT4 as well. So that's why I'm including him in this deck today. Another new addition that we haven't gone over yet is the red Rise Greymon. So we've got yellow Rise Greymon, now we got red Rise Greymon. So this is kind of similar to the DNA Digivolution Digimon that we saw in 1.5. This Rise Greymon can evolve on a yellow or a red for 3, and it counts as a yellow or a red when it is in play. So this also has a neat, cool Digiburst ability, similarly to the WarGreymon as well. And his Digiburst is, by detaching 2, we can play a red or yellow, I just mixed them together, made one word, tamer with a play cost of 4 or less from our hand for free. So while the yellow Rise Greymon, if you're familiar, allows us to play a tamer for free on Digivolution, the red Rise Greymon also allows us to accelerate our tamers into play, but instead we get through the Digiburst ability as well. So this is kind of cool, because unlike the Rise Greymon, which is yellow, that requires us to have a tamer in play, in hand already, or potentially have to force us to draw us into a tamer to get his effect off, Rise Greymon red, we can play a little bit slower and draw into a tamer potentially later on in our turn, then use this Digiburst ability to put him into play. And then on top of that, we've got another cool inheritable, which is if we have a tamer in play period, on attack declaration, we can give one of our opponent's Digimon minus 2,000, which kind of helps us shave off the edge that Shine might potentially miss if we didn't have enough tamers in play to kind of potentially just murder something with its own effect. Then again, we're playing the WarGreymon here for the DP reduction, and then we got 4 copies of Shrine Greymon again. So, you know him, you love him. Every tamer, 4,000. The reason this version of the deck I'm really excited for is because even though we have to play a lot of tamers, we can accelerate them into play a little bit faster. Furthermore, Shine has the neat little bonus of having Chaosmon as an additional partner, because now once you're done with your Shine Greymon, you can turn it into a Chaosmon for further destruction. But the reason I do like Shine Greymon in BT4 as well is because it can also be very aggressive, since this Rise Greymon still gives it the ability to get security attack +1, and depending on how many tamers we have in play, our Shine Greymons can reach heights of like 17, 18, 19,000, which is basically going to burn through every single security without question. And then the last new addition to the deck, we've got 3 copies of the new Tai Kamiya from BT4. He is a yellow Tai, and he costs 3, which means he synergizes with our Rise Greymon, rather, because he's a 4 cost or less. And gone are the security TK. He's gone, out of the way, boom, enter Tai, you know. He's our new best friend. And what he says is that if we have 3 or fewer security cards, all of our Digimon gain plus 1,000. But the coolest part of this tie is that when we delete an opponent's Digimon by dropping their DP to 0, we can suspend him to gain 1 memory. So, this is really neat, because now, similarly, something like Patamon, for example, depending on how many we have in play, multiply that by the amount of ties that we have in play, and we can potentially play a Shrine Greymon for absolutely free. We can slam it down for 4, nuke our opponent's board, and then, depending on what we have in play, depending on how many sequences, this just gives us more redundancy to gain that memory back and continue on with our plays. So now we have the ability to bomb our opponent out at 4k a tamer, depending on how many tamers we have, and then continue to proceed onward and push forward. This potentially means that if we were to gain our 4 memory back for Shrine Greymon, we can actually go into Chaosmon immediately and only give our opponent 2 to pass the turn. And we can further deplete their board and then choke them out even more, which is a very, very, very strong play. And then we're comboing that with more Blinding Light as well, just to give us more memory acceleration as well. So instead of playing Glorious Burst, we're opting to play a more accelerated Tamer strategy in this version of the deck. And because Pitomon is in here as well, that gives us a bit more speed in combination with the Rise Greymon to A, set up our Tamers period, but B, set up our evolution stacks as well. So this is a really strong deck, I think, that going into BT4, a lot of people might not expect. If they see yellow, they might just put you on WarGreymon as well and play as if you had WarGreymon. And while this is a bit, again, grindier and requires a little more setup, I think that the ultimately the end goal of this deck is going to be still just as rewarding as it was in 1.5. So that is it for the yellow decks, I guess, that we're going to cover today. So now let's talk about the one blue deck that I have built to go over with you guys as well. This is another tab because I'd planned on putting another blue deck together, but I was never one I was happy with, so I'm just going to delete that now. So let's talk about blue. And of course, it's our boy Imperial Dramon. You know, I can't forget about him. He's where my roots are. He's one of my favorite Digimon. He's still another one of my favorite decks as well. Blue has kind of been my favorite color as well, on top of yellow ever since this game's introduction. So, of course, this is a deck I was super excited for. So, let's talk about it. So, it's an Imperial Dramon deck, so we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the cards that you already know and love and you're super familiar with. Instead, we're going to talk about the cards that you've never seen before, because this is going to create a new layer of consistency, but also aggression for Imperial Dramon as well. So, we're playing a new hybrid engine. So, Stravimon, this is the rookie equivalent of Lobomon, if you're familiar with Digimon Frontier. And on play for 3 cost, we can look at the top 3 cards per deck, add 1 Digimon with hybrid in its form. I guess he means like they're these text box here. Or, which is very important, 1 blue Tamer card among them to your hand. And we can put the remaining cards at the bottom of our deck. So now, Stravimon is a way to search our Davis, which is super important because we need kind of Davis in this deck to function, and the sooner we get to it, the better. Davis will further then search our deck for even 3 more copies and thin our deck out even more to get to our Imperial Dramon that much faster. But the reason that Stravimon's in this deck as well is because he can search our new friend Lobomon. And now, because this deck is so reliant on Davis as well, the opportunity to have multiple Davis in play is always present, but you only really need the one to stick after it resolves, because having multiple don't really do anything for you after the fact, because you only have the 1 passive to go back to 3 memory every turn. So what Lobomon does, and what all Spirit Digimon I assume will do based on what we've seen so far with the Goonimon and the Petal stuff that's been revealed so far, we can Digivolve them on top of Tamers, treating our Tamers as level 3 Digimon. So what this means is that our extra redundant Davises that have we've searched and they've served their purpose and they're just kind of sitting there uselessly, we can actually turn them into attackers, which can then further turn them up to Imperial Dramons, for example, which is actually really, really, really cool. And that gives us an extra layer of aggression because it's something that can be super unexpected, and it can allow us to get extra bodies in play without necessarily having to have the previous requirement set up of a rookie. So Stravimon is kind of the new package deal in this deck. It can search out Lobomon and it can search out Davis. And to complement the Lobomon here, we're bumping up our Davis count to 4, so we could potentially see it either ASAP in terms of drawing into it early on in the game, but also to have hits off of Stravimon. And Stravimon basically replaces Gabumon in this instance now as our kind of extra auxiliary 3-cost drop, but instead of getting just the free draw in general, we have the potential to dig through our deck to either get a 2-hit or get something specifically necessary to advance our game state. Further than that, the deck is pretty much exactly the same to what you'd see in a current list. XVmon's cut down to 2 just to make way for the Lobomons. We're still playing 3 Grizzlymon because we want to make sure that we don't die to Rookie Rush. That's being complemented with 2 copies of Shikuamon as well, because sometimes Imperial Dramon just loses to itself because it just can't draw the right pieces. And I find that the Stravimon engine, to accelerate our ability to get into Davis to find those right pieces that much faster, is kind of the missing piece of the puzzle that the deck kind of had, where it potentially struggled in some instances in 1.5. But yeah, that is it for the blue Imperial Dramon deck as well, that I'm kind of super excited to bring into the BT4 format. It plays very similarly to how it plays now. We've got our jamming kind of main strategy with the Vmon. We got our jammers here with Dino B and Pale Dramon as well. And then finally, our end goal is to get to Imperial Dramon for just extra massive additional swings. We have Omnimon to help us here for removal, and we have Hammer Spark to help us with memory manipulation, as well as giving us strong hits in our security to potentially end our opponent's turn. So yeah, that is it for the first episode, I guess it might be a series, who knows, of Before the Rainbow, where I talk about some of the decks that I'm kind of super excited for the BT4 format. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. I hope that I've had some interesting insights for you. Some of these decks you've probably already seen before, because, you know, BT format has existed for 6 months, God knows how long in Japan. So some of this may not be new to you. If it is, and you learned something today, great. I appreciate it. If you like what we do here at Overground, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, so I know that you enjoyed it and that you will like similar content like this in the future from me. So I have been Mike, aka Synaku, once again from Overground. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one.